everyone, my name is Evie Lupine. Welcome back to my channel, and today I have another video for you all. Today, oh my goodness, it has been so long since I have said that phrase. I am, if you couldn't tell, in a different place than I used to be. I have been filming things for Patreon and some side projects, but this is the first time I am sitting down to do a YouTube video in a really long time. So this is not permanent. We're in kind of a random part of the house right now. I'm next to a painting I haven't hung up yet, but the subject for today I just think couldn't wait. It's a little bit more of a timely thing because I'm going to be talking about my decision to switch birth control methods. This is not really something that I talk a lot about on my channel, but I have previously discussed in multiple videos having the Nuvaring, my first impressions with it, and then sort of longer term using it for multiple years. And I'm going to be talking about why I chose to go from the Nuvaring to Nexplanon. So if you don't know what Nexplanon is, it is an arm implant, not to be confused with an IUD or an intrauterine device. I find sometimes people say implant and they really just mean an IUD. This one goes in your arm, and I think it's something that not a lot of people know about or really consider as an option. So what I want to do today is talk about what Nexplanon is, why I chose to move from Nuvaring to Nexplanon. Like I said, I'm also going to be talking about finding a place to get this done, the procedure itself, what to expect, side effects, just sort of the science that I could find around how long you can use it for, common questions that I think are going to come up for a lot of people trying to get those things answered, and my first impressions and my initial experience with everything. And then I'm also planning on doing, depending on how things go, doing either a 1 month and a 3 month update, or doing a 3 month and then like a year update. So kind of like the first part in a much longer conversation. So like I said, the Nexplanon is an arm implant. It is the newer version of something called Implanon that was available for a while. It is a single tiny little stick. I think it's like 4 millimeters by 2 millimeters or 2 centimeters or something. It's really, really small. Put like a picture on screen so you can see what it looks like. And like I said, it goes in your arm. There was an older version of something very similar to this that was called Norplant. Different company, different manufacturer as far as I know. That one was multiple rods inserted in your arm in a fan shape. That was what I learned about when I was in sex ed. Now, Norplant was taken off the market quite a long time ago. There were lawsuits around it. It was not very widely popular because of the fact there were so many lawsuits about it. And so when I first learned about that as an option, all that long time ago in health class, I completely just totally wrote off having an arm implant because I'm like, oh my god, why would I want like 5 or 6 different rods in my arm? Like, no thank you, that would feel really freaky. Do not want to have that experience. So I just completely did not consider it really as an option when I was thinking about birth control for myself. Now, like I've said, I was on the Nuvaring. I've been on the Nuvaring for years at this point, and the reason I'm switching is not even really because I'm super unhappy with the Nuvaring. I feel like I've had pretty good experiences with it. I like the flexibility of it in terms of you can use it in multiple ways. You can use it for 3 weeks and then take it out to have a period for 1 week and then put a new one in. You can use it for 4 weeks continuously. You can even use it up to 5 weeks continuously because of how good it is at fully covering and releasing hormones. So I liked that there was some flexibility, so that way it wasn't like an emergency if I was gone on a long weekend trip or somewhere else and I forgot that I needed to have a new Nuvaring that day. Like, I could wait a day and then change it, and it wasn't the end of the world. And for me, the way that I ended up using it was sort of more of a hybrid of the first 2 methods, where I could go for months and months doing the method where I left it in for 4 weeks and did not have a period, and I would do that for probably an average, I would say about 4 months at a time, and then I would listen to my body, and when I felt like I needed to have a period, and especially if I, maybe got some spotting a couple of days before the day I was supposed to change my ring, I would take my ring out and leave it out for the 3 to 4 days before a new ring was supposed to be inserted. So I always found it really easy to use. When I did have periods, they were very light, very sparse, but it was nice to have that reassurance that I was still able to get and having periods while on the Nuvaring. So that was really nice for me. No problems remembering to put a new one in. I think I had like one issue once actually where I was putting a new one in late, but I just left the original one in for longer than the 4 weeks that I would typically use it for, and it was totally fine, no issues. The kind of main downside of the Nuvaring, it would probably be two things. So one is vaginal dryness and discharge is much more common with the Nuvaring compared to other forms of birth control. So if that's something you already deal with, it may be more uncomfortable for you. I personally didn't mind it too much, but it is something to be aware of. And then the other thing is it is a ring that goes inside your vagina, and so if you want to leave it in during sex, it can sometimes cause issues. Now, you're supposed to leave it in the whole time that you're using it for like a ring week. You're not supposed to take it out and leave it out for hours and hours. Now, if you're having sex for 10 minutes and it's been, a couple days into your new ring cycle, you can take it out for a very short period of time and then put it back in. However, you don't always want to be doing that because the ring can get dirty, it can get lost, a cat might get to it. You never know, life stuff just happens, right? So I would try to leave it in as often as possible, but I found, for example, if I was doing something with digital penetration, it seemed to be more likely that I would have some bleeding after sex than if I had taken the ring out. There was some sort of additional friction that was being caused by the Nuvaring, not enough to be a cause for alarm and cause me to want to stop using it, but that's what I've noticed is it can cause some friction. Even using lube, even being warmed up, there can still be that possibility. So more what influenced my decision to change to a new method of birth control wasn't that I was dissatisfied with the Nuvaring, but frankly the change in political climate in the United States and wanting something that was going to be a little bit more secure, a little bit longer term. And I have been thinking about changing to a longer term method that I can kind of set and forget, because I do have a lot of friends that do have IUDs. I would say the majority of people I know that use birth control either use the pill or use a Nuvaring, or sorry, not the Nuvaring, they use an IUD, and those are the two that are the most common. And I would say even amongst that, it's probably 60% with an IUD and then 40% that use the pill. And most people that I know that have an IUD used to use the pill. So that is sort of what my background with that was. And I looked at a bunch of different options. I was considering getting an IUD done, but because I know so many people that have had it, I have lots of horror stories at my disposal of how painful insertion can be, because if you're watching this and you're not from the US, anesthetic is not routinely given as part of IUD insertion, and it can be very painful. I know people that have passed out from it. I know people that have had continual issues with having it in when they're having some kind of intercourse, be that with fingers or with the penis, where when something is inside, it can hit against the string part of the IUD, and that can cause a lot of pain for the penetrating partner, and just it moving around, and ectopic pregnancies. And we'll talk about that in terms of science and comparison between the two later on in this video. But I just if I have another option, I want to do that instead. So that's when I started looking into the arm implant more, and learned that there were multiple newer versions that have come out since the fan-shaped Norplan implant that was what I thought everything was. And actually the Nexplanon is a more recent update to Implanon, like I mentioned, and it was primarily changed because of safety features. So now they have it basically so it comes in a sterile cartridge for insertion by a medical practitioner, so there's less risk of site infection because of that, and just making sure that the insertion is done properly. And also, I don't know what it is exactly, but there's a very small amount of a compound that they used in it now, so that way it can be detected on an x-ray. So if it does move, since it's original insertion, it can easily be detected on an x-ray, which I think is a really nice feature, because though it is very rare, there is a small chance that it could move from its original insertion site to somewhere else on the body. So I like having that reassurance. I like that it's been updated and that it's kind of like the newer, better version, like a new model of a car, so to speak. So I did a lot of research before I decided that I did want to get Nexplanon, but obviously because of the aforementioned changes in the political climate of this country, it has been difficult to find a place to get something like this done. I looked at probably 4 or 5 different private, like, women's health clinics and places that do birth control things in my local area, but none of them at the time I was making this appointment would have been like the middle of June. And then now when I got it done is early July, and then when they were scheduling for it was like August and September. And when I made the decision, I didn't want to have to wait for months and months to get it done. I just wanted it to be taken care of. So of course my next step was to call Planned Parenthood. Now, for when I was getting my Nuvaring prescription, I did not get it done through Planned Parenthood. I have gone to Planned Parenthood multiple times for other services. I got all my Gardasil vaccines there. I've gotten pap smears there. I've gotten testing there. It's really, really great. I love Planned Parenthood. I highly encourage support for Planned Parenthood. But this is my first experience going there for the purpose of birth control. And so I called them up because there weren't any appointments available online, and I talked to the receptionist for like the local area that I'm in, and I think there's 4 or 5 clinics that are in sort of this one surface area, and they were able to find one appointment for me that was in the middle of the day, of course, in the farthest clinic from where I live. Is like 45 minutes away, but they were able to find an appointment for, I think it was about a week later. So that was great. I was like, cool, sign me up, let's get this over with. And then they gave me some instructions for what to expect when I got to the clinic. Now, when the actual appointment day arrived, I woke up. I had a little bit of a headache, so I did take in a leave because, you know, at that point it was going to be like 4 or 5 hours before the procedure was going to be getting done. I was going to have to be in the car for, you know, almost an hour, like over an hour both ways. And I was like, I really don't want to be dealing with a headache when I am going through this, so let's just like take this. I say this because this could impact the experience that I had with pain and other things after the procedure. I'm not recommending you take a pain reliever before getting the procedure done, but I'm letting you know that I did because I was experiencing a headache the day that I was getting the procedure done. So drive to the clinic, totally fine, not any sort of a big deal, no protesters, no anything like that, but it was definitely more locked down than what I have experienced at the old Planned Parenthood I would go to in Seattle. The one in Seattle, I would just walk in, no big deal, no security guards, no, like nothing. It was just like walking into a regular clinic, basically. However, this one, maybe as a result of Roe v. Wade, maybe as just something about the area and protesters, it did seem to be near several churches, so that could be it. But in any case, it was a little bit more locked down. I had to be buzzed in from the outside, and there was like a pretty heavy door, and the entrance was also around the back side of the building. So that way, like, the entrance couldn't be seen from the road because the area in front of it was a pretty main road. This one was pretty private. The parking was around the back, so you could enter and have it be a little bit more secure than, like, I don't know, walking into like something in a strip mall, let's say. And so I had a support person with me, and they were like, okay, well, for the first part of this and being in the waiting room, you can't have your support person with you, but they can wait in the car, and then once the first part of your procedure is done, then they can go ahead and come in for the rest of the procedure. So it's like, oh, okay. Had to go in by myself, did all the checking in, signing in things, and then I just sat down and I waited. Now, Planned Parenthood is notorious for being very behind on wait times, and I was prepared to spend like 2 hours there, honestly. I was like, this is probably going to take like 2 or 3 hours. I'm just going to chill, I can be on my phone, and that's just going to be how it is, and that's totally fine. So I was prepared to wait for a while. I think I ended up waiting for maybe like 20 minutes before the very first part of the procedure started. And I was interested about how that was able to happen because I had overheard somebody else in the lobby say that they only had one provider in that day, and so they were really behind, but I guess whatever it is that they were doing was speeding along, and so I was able to be seen right away. Now, while I was in the waiting room, I was given a very nice information packet about information for informed consent implant. Now, by the way, for this video, I have lots of notes on like research and stuff, so I will be looking at my phone for reference during this, but this was really, really nice. So what this says is it describes what the implant is, and then it describes how it prevents pregnancy, if that's a concern for you. It says it's good for up to 5 years. We'll talk about that claim later on in the video. And then it says the benefits of the implant. And I'm really glad that I got this because I was not aware of some of the benefits of the implant, which it says it protects you from pregnancy in the tubes, which is what people also refer to as ectopic pregnancy. And I was like, oh, okay, I did not know that. The implant has a different risk profile for an ectopic pregnancy compared to an IUD. And again, we'll talk about some of the research about that later on in this video. It also protects you from bad cramps. It also goes into the risks of the implant itself, so infection, arm pain, discoloration, or scarring, and I will show you guys my implant site if you haven't noticed it already in this video, so that way you guys can see sort of what to expect in that regard based on my experience. And then it goes into the side effects of the implant. So not the risks, but the side effects. That would be nausea, sore breast tissue, headache, irregular bleeding, which is the really, really big one. And again, saying this again, we'll talk more about that in a minute. Weight gain, soreness, bruising, and swelling at the site of the implant being put in. So there's more about the science behind common side effects with the implant. I do have a list to go through a little bit later on, but it goes over other birth control choices, and then it goes into discussion about like how the implant's put in, and then anything else that you might need to know, and then for people that this might not work for. Going back to actually being in the clinic and getting the procedure done, the first part of it is just like standard intake about like your background, making sure you don't have any like counter indications for whether you like shouldn't actually be getting this done, making sure you haven't had any unprotected sex for the last 2 weeks. And by unprotected, they mean you haven't been using some form of birth control, be that condoms or another form of hormonal birth control, a copper IUD, things like that. You have to have some kind of either abstinence from sex or having a backup method used, or just a birth control method used before you go and get the implant done. You do have to take a pregnancy test, which I am glad I was informed of prior to going to the clinic when I was making the initial appointment. I don't know why exactly that's required, but they do have you do a pregnancy test before you get the implant inserted to make sure you aren't pregnant when it's getting done, I guess. So I did do that. I have not taken a lot of pregnancy tests before in my day, but they literally just have you go pee in a cup, you leave it in the restroom in their like biohazard area, and then they do the test, and then if it's not a problem, I guess they don't tell you anything about it. So it was mostly that, and then they also went over, actually something I was really grateful for is they did ask like, hey, is it okay if we ask you some questions about safety and security in your relationship? I don't think that's the exact phrase they used, but it was something to that effect, and I was like, yeah, sure. So they ask you about like if you feel safe in your relationship, if you're here of your own free will, if you feel coerced to get this done or not, if you've had your partner do any other forms of reproductive coercion in your relationship, if they've sabotaged condoms, hidden birth control pills, things like that. And I was really, really grateful that they did this. Of course, with myself, I was like, I haven't had any issues, but for people for whom they might be getting something like this done because they're afraid of their abuser getting them pregnant and trapping them in their relationship, and they need something discreet that their abuser maybe won't recognize, like an IUD, like that could be a really important point of contact for potentially helping somebody leave an abusive relationship. So I was really grateful to see that done. I don't really know what they would do if somebody answered like that they felt unsafe, or that they, you know, felt like they were getting this done because of pressure from someone else. I don't know what the next steps are depending on answers to those questions, but I'm assuming it involves directing somebody towards resources, because I don't think they have any way to like directly, legally, or judicially interfere in anything going on in a relationship. But I am glad that it's there, and I think that was a really good step. They also ask about, you know, the types of partners you have sex with and the last time you had sex, because that goes to like the whether or not they need to give you a pregnancy test or or not. And honestly, it was really easy. It was not judgmental at all. They really do not care what combination of genitals you do or don't have sex with, or the ways that you have sex, or if you're poly or monogamous. They just want to make sure that they are getting the answers they need to be able to go forward with the procedure. I've always had really good experiences at Planned Parenthood with feeling welcomed, feeling accepted, and not feeling judged for the fact that I have like weird, kinky, poly relationships where like I might show up at a clinic and like have a bruise on my leg and like be able to say like, hey, I'm in a consensual BDSM relationship. This is from a consensual activity that happened. Like, you don't need to worry about it. And just being able to be like, oh, okay. And then just have them, you know, move on from that. So again, very positive experience in that regard. Now, after this point, there was a little bit of confusion with allowing my support person to come in and be in the room with me, because now I understand the reason why they have, at least in part, have it be so that way the support person is not with you for the first part, is they don't want an abuser to be in the same room as someone when they're asking the abuse victim, hey, have you experienced XYZ thing? Because then you're not going to get clear answers, and then it could become a dangerous situation. So that makes sense to me. However, like I was told by the nurse practitioner, like, oh, like now like you can text your support person and tell them they can come in and tell them that blah, blah, blah says they can come in. And I did that, and then they still weren't allowed in the building. And like it was a lot of confusion, and then eventually they were able to come in, and then we just waited for a while. I think my appointment time was 11:50, and then I actually saw the doctor who's going to be doing the insertion at like 12:45-ish. Now, when it came to getting the actual implant done, they had like a whole setup by a table of like, you know, all the usual cleaning products and the actual like implant like cartridge in its sterile casing. And then my support partner was allowed to be in the room when it was done. When the doctor came in to talk to me, they also did some additional counseling. I didn't mention this, but both this packet and then also having the original nurse practitioner give me some initial information about the implant, and then also the doctor did as well, just to make totally sure that I was fully giving informed consent, which again, I really like, and that's what I encourage, not just in kink settings, but in life, in medical settings as well. Having informed consent is really important. So they were very, very clear about here's what the side effects are, here's what to expect, here's how long you can use it for, all that stuff, which is really important. And the one thing that they both emphasized was bleeding. And that is the main side effect that causes people to discontinue use of the Nexplanon. Is, I think it was something I saw in the data of like 11% of people that discontinue use of Nexplanon do it because of severe or unwanted changes in their bleeding patterns. And it can be all across the board. It can be you have no bleeding the whole time, you can have occasional spotting off and on, you can have bleeding that never stops, you can go from having really light periods to really heavy periods. It can change over the course of time you have the implant, because the longer you have the implant in, the lower and lower the hormone dose you get per month goes. And so your body might react one way to like a really high dose, and then by like the end of the third year, you're having a completely different reaction. So it can really just change across the board. And from what I heard from the doctor, it really doesn't matter what your previous bleeding was like. If you have super heavy bleeding or super irregular bleeding, or you were like me and you were on the Nuvaring for years, it doesn't matter. It's just, it's going to most likely change your cycle in some way. And for a lot of people, they don't want that. I can imagine, especially if you are, for example, a trans man that wants to get an implant done because maybe getting an IUD feels kind of dysphoric, which I totally understand. Maybe you wouldn't want to get something that's going to randomly force a period on you without any kind of warning at literally any time, because that would also be very dysphoric. So I understand there are definitely a lot of populations, not even just cis women, that don't like having random periods, for whom this could be a pretty major concern and something that, you know, would need to be discussed. So I was really, really grateful for that. And my doctor was wonderful. She had wonderful bedside manner, was super personable and very knowledgeable about everything as well. We got to talk a little bit about, you know, her background before she like was an app developer, and then she became a doctor and then decided to work for Planned Parenthood. And like, she was really, really nice, really friendly. Now, moving into potential trigger warning territory here for talking about getting a medical procedure done. This is where we're going to talk about the actual literally getting the implant done in the arm physical process. So they have you lay down on a table. I'm left-handed, so I actually had the implant done on my right side, and they have you lay down. They numb you up beforehand, yay, thank goodness, and that is typically the most painful part of the procedure, or it should be. So they numb you up, and then they let it sit in for a while, and that's when we had the conversation about, you know, her background and choosing to become a doctor. And so they did sort of the numbing of it, and then when I think it was a needle or something she was poking me with, I was looking away so I couldn't see, and she's like, can you feel that? Does that feel sharp? And I was like, no. So he was like, okay, cool, you're numb enough now. And so I looked away the whole time, but it is, the closest thing I could compare it to is a medical stapler is sort of what it looks like, and my support partner did watch it get done, and from what they said happened is, it's a sizable incision. It's a couple of millimeters across, I think, and you guys, again, I'll show you what the little part I have here looks like, and then it goes like kind of deep under the skin and then deeper into the skin, like it goes like this kind of, and then that's where the implant goes in on your arm, and you're supposed to be able to palpate it under the skin, so that way you can make sure it's in the right place, and then that also makes for easier proper removal when you are either getting it taken out or replaced in a couple of years. So in terms of like pressure, a little bit, but no pain whatsoever, no problem. It doesn't require stitches. You know, maybe if something went horribly wrong, you might need stitches, but no stitches, no anything like that. They just put a pressure bandage over it and then some extra gauze to help prevent any additional bruising, and that you leave on for 24 hours, no showering, don't get it wet, and then after that you leave a bandage on for several days over the area to help prevent any kind of infection. And that is more or less it. Like the actual getting it done was nothing. I have had a mole removed actually, and I would say the mole removal was worse because I actually had a mole removed that's like a birthmark type mole where it's like it's pretty deep in the skin and they have to like punch it out with a little punch, and then you have to get it stitched and you have to have the stitches removed. That was way worse than getting this done. This was like after, if you can handle the tiny little needle of getting numbing done, you can handle getting the implant done. I had no pain whatsoever, and that is the story I've heard from so many people who get this done. I've never heard anyone, unless maybe they have some kind of like thing where maybe, you know, numbing agents don't work super well on them. I don't know. I've never heard of anyone have any issues with getting the implant inserted in terms of pain and discomfort, especially compared to getting the IUD. It was really not an issue whatsoever. Now, the main immediate side effect that can happen with getting the Nexplanon implant done is you can get a like pain in your arm. You can get a really sore arm. You can get bruising. And so I didn't know what to expect with that. So I was expecting like, am I going to have trouble driving home? Am I going to be able to carry my elderly dog up and down the stairs? Like, am I going to be able to lift things over my head? Like, how bad is it going to be? And honestly, for the whole several days after I had this done, I kept expecting there to be arm soreness, and I had none. I had no pain, no discomfort. Now, if I touched the area right where the implant got done, that would be sensitive because you do have a rod of plastic in your arm, and that's new and different, so of course it's going to be sore. But unless I was provoking it on purpose because I had touched it or something else, there was no discomfort. It was really easy, no soreness, no anything. I could sleep on that arm fine. Everything with it was totally fine. And then it was super easy to take the wrap off and then make sure that I changed bandages and things like that. So really no issues in terms of immediately after getting the procedure done. It was super easy, by the way. Now, in terms of like wrapping up the procedure and how much it costs, that was all really easy. It was just like, okay, you're done. And then we left, and then we got a smoothie, and then that was it. You know, it was super easy. And then paying for it. Now, this will depend on where you live, but, and also depending on your insurance. If you do have insurance, it will most likely be covered. I actually did find information about what the insurance codes are, so I will put that on screen for you now so you can ask your insurance, but most places in the US will cover it, and so it should be free or low cost. It's usually going to be either like $0 or $300. The full price of getting the implant done at maximum for the implant itself. I don't know if there would be other like procedure fees or something on top of that, or anesthetic fees or something, but the maximum cost is like $1,300. But for me it was free because of my insurance, so it was like, okay, you're done, like here, like, you know, do you want to make a donation? Okay, and then like leave, and that's it. It was super easy once everything was done. And I feel like I'm saying that a lot, but it's true. It like, compared to what I've heard about getting the IUD put in, absolute night and day getting Nexplanon done. Just totally different worlds, no pain after the procedure. Like, I was up and running, ready to go. I went to a farmer's market the day afterwards, and I was carrying like a heavy, like this wide across like basket of plants in my arms for like 10 minutes as I walked back to my car. No problems at all. No issues, able to carry my elderly 10-pound dog just fine. Like, she's great. So, you know, it was really everything I could hope for, because I was prepared for and expecting it to be quite uncomfortable. Since then, let's talk about side effects. So I haven't experienced any side effects in terms of you know, pain in my arm, nausea. I haven't started any random bleeding, so, you know, fingers crossed that is going to continue in that direction. The main thing I have experienced is, I would say, I'm very irritable. I normally have like a little bit of a short fuse, but I really have a short fuse like right now. Like, I'm just like, everything's annoying to me. I want everyone to leave me alone. Like, just, And I'm asexual, so if you don't know, I'm asexual. And I normally am not super repulsed by sex. I just don't care about it. However, I have found myself more sex repulsed than I usually am, like, in that it annoys me when a roommate is like watching a show and the characters are having sex. I'm just like, why do they always have to show that in TV shows? It's kind of gross. I don't want to have to see this. Why don't we just stick to the plot? Like, those kinds of thoughts, you know? So those are the main side effects that I've experienced so far. And then other than that, like, even for me, that seems pretty normal. So let's talk a little bit about comparing the side effects of the Nuvaring and Nexplanon in a little bit more detail. So when I first got the Nuvaring, I would say for the first several weeks especially, and then continuing for a couple of months, I was very emotional. Not in terms of like being irritable in particular, but like I would cry a lot. I was offended way more easily. Like, I was just more emotionally activated than I typically would be, but that did even out after a couple of months back to sort of my baseline. And I am a pretty emotional person generally. I cry when I see cute animals on my Instagram feed. Like, I'm just kind of an emotional person. So I was expecting that to happen to sort of amp up what was already there. And I actually, one thing that I do want to note is part of my decision to switch from the Nuvaring to Nexplanon in particular was the fact that Nexplanon is a one hormone form of birth control rather than being a combined form of birth control. It uses only progestin. I think I got it that time. I've had to say that like 20 times and I'm not confident that I'm saying it correctly, but it only uses one hormone. And that one hormone is the same progestin that is used in the Nuvaring, which is, and we're going to have to go to Google again for this one because it's a long science name.
Etonogestrel.
Etonogestrel is what it is. So it uses the same form of hormone in both the Nuvaring and in Nexplanon, which I thought, okay, well, it's not a guarantee that I'm going to respond in the same way, but it is the same one. And so even though the form of delivery is obviously very different, one's a ring in the vagina, you change every month, and then one's an implant in the arm, you leave it for years, I was like, okay, I feel more comfortable making the change and that I kind of know what to expect. And so far, I have experienced very similar side effects because, okay, I'm feeling emotional with both of these things, so I know to expect that. I know how to deal with that. Now, speaking of the Nuvaring, I do also want to mention that when you are switching from one form of birth control to another, I was advised by the doctor to leave the Nuvaring in for 7 days, so that way I was fully protected in case I did have any vaginal intercourse in those first 7 days. Now, from what I could tell, there are some different opinions about how long. Now, somebody's doing donuts outside of my house in the parking lot across the street, so if you're hearing that, that's what it's like to live here. But I did see some different research about how long you should continue a different form of birth control before switching to a new one, and I'll leave it up on screen so that way you guys can see exactly what it says. But based on the research that I did, if you are switching to the implants from the ring, you're supposed to insert the implant 4 days before stopping the ring. I don't know why they recommended 7 versus 4, but from what I can tell on this chart, if you were guessing about which number to go with, 7 is by far the most common recommendation for most forms of birth control. So I am going to take it out because now I'm between 4 days and 7 days. So now having that information, I am probably going to take it out because I do think the extremeness of my current emotional responses to things is probably at least partly informed by the fact that I have like double the amount of hormones that I would normally have on a given day. So I'm hoping that once I do remove the Nuvaring later on, that I am going to maybe see a little bit more of a leveling out of the mood, though, you know, no promises, who knows. That is an important factor to consider, that you are going to need to most likely overlap a little bit to some degree. So let's talk a little bit about side effects again, just in general. So the ones that were listed to me on the informed consent sheet, again, were nausea, sore breast tissue, headache, irregular bleeding, weight gain, soreness, bruising, and swelling at the place that the implant was put in. Based on what I could find for the most common side effects that are out there, let's see here, we have a whole table, and again, I'll put this on screen so that way you guys can see it, is headache was the most common at 25%, vaginitis, weight increase, acne, breast pain, abdominal pain, influenza-like symptoms, dizziness, dysmenorrhea, back pain, emotional issues, nausea, general pain, nervousness, depression, hypersensitivity, and so on. Now, for the reactions that cause people to discontinue using the implant, that would include bleeding irregularities. Again, that was really emphasized to me when I was getting consulted for getting it done, so that makes sense. Emotional issues, weight increase, headache, acne, and then worsening depression. The depression was actually higher amongst US subjects, as was the increase in overall emotional issues. So I guess, I don't know, us Americans have more issues to deal with, I guess, though. You know, if you're dealing with women's health, then kind of makes sense, doesn't it? Okay, dark humor over. Those are sort of the main reactions to expect. I will say with the weight increase, one thing that you need to consider that's not always talked about in context with this is that people tend to gain weight over time. And so I don't know if that number is necessarily any kind of weight gain, or if it's weight gain that's like really significant. Like, it doesn't really say, is it like 50 pounds? Is it 5? Is it, especially because when you are on birth control and when you have cycles, like, your weight naturally increases and decreases over time, and again, weight tends to trend upwards. So I wouldn't necessarily say that fear of weight gain should be a main cause of concern that would prevent you from getting it done. And again, you know, there are so many other symptoms that can happen that are not just weight gain. But for me, the main thing I have been experiencing is that pronounced change in emotional reaction to things. So that has been my main thing that I have been experiencing, but it's certainly not, I think at this point, anything that's going to cause me to want to stop this. Now, like I said, I haven't experienced any breakthrough bleeding at this point. I haven't gone through that at all. Now, once I take my Nuvaring out, I suspect that that could start happening, but that is the big one to watch for because, again, like I already said, that can wildly change your cycles, intensity, length of cycles. I did talk to the doctor about how like extreme it can get, like, and she said, well, I've only had one person that had spotting continuously for a year before they decided to get it removed, and there are things they can do to help you with the spotting. So she did say, like, hey, if you're having spotting like for a month solid, like, come in and see us, we want to get that checked out, and there can be things we can do for you to help with that besides just going straight for implant removal potentially, or maybe that does mean implant removal, I don't know, but there, like, that is a really common thing that can happen. So do really be aware of that in your decision making process. Now, some other things from this sheet that I did want to go over is, let's talk about the fact that it's good for potentially 5 years. Now, the current FDA label recommendation is 3 years. That is what it was recommended for and approved for when it was first approved by the FDA, I think in the 90s would have been when, it would have been either the 90s or maybe the early 2000s when Implanon, which was the original version, was approved, and they've stuck with that for Nexplanon. However, there have since been studies done with lots of people that does recommend approval for extended use to up to 5 years for the Nexplanon implant. So this is what it says, is that the initial regulated trials on the ENG releasing subdermal contraceptive implant conducted in the 1990s were designed to measure cumulative 3-year efficacy. The ENG implant has both well-established safety and efficacy for up to 3 years. Pharmacokinetic data on ENG show high levels at 3 years, and some previous clinical research confirms efficacy beyond the current approved duration of 3 years. Today, many women, because the label duration has been reached, have the ENG implant removed at 3 years, increasing cost, inconvenience, and risk. And then they go on to describe that they looked at several different groups of women in terms of they had about 400 that were in the ENG implant group, about 522 in the LNG implant group, and then 416 in an IUD implant group to evaluate the risk of pregnancy. Now, what they said in their main results section is that over 200 women used the ENG implant for at least 5 years. No pregnancies occurred during the additional 2 years of follow-up in the ENG or in the LNG implant group. The overall 5-year KM cumulative pregnancy rates for ENG and LNG implants were 0.6 per 100 women years. Now, during my consultation, they did tell me that it might even end up being longer, that they're now looking at even it going up to 7 years, which would be really, really amazing in terms of how long you can leave one form of birth control in for. I would say that I think there is sort of a sweet spot for Nexplanon that maybe is why, people are getting it, which is that it does prevent pregnancy, but it's not like a 10-year long method. And so maybe if you're considering, okay, do I want to get an IUD or something else, maybe you only want to go through the pain of getting an IUD done if it's going to last for 7 years or 10 years or something. Whereas with Nexplanon, because it's shorter term, maybe if you only want shorter term use of a birth control method that is still long acting, you're like, okay, well, I don't want to have to get this taken out in only 3 years, so like what are my other options? And maybe you only want something for a year or 2 years or 3 years, and so maybe that kind of works better for what your family planning needs are. I think that's really awesome, but if it can go for longer as well, that's also great. So I'm excited to see there is research that does say that it can be used for up to 5 years. However, that is not what it is currently FDA approved for. I think this is very similar as with the Nuvaring. There are lots of off-label ways that a prescriber can tell you is generally safe to be using the Nuvaring. So it is supposed to be used for, with the Nuvaring, 3 weeks, ring-free week, new ring. People use it for 3 weeks and then a new ring, or 4 weeks and then a new ring, or 5 weeks, or they alternate between months with no periods, and then they do the 3 weeks and then 1 week and then go back to 4 weeks. Like, there are lots of off-label ways to use birth control, so that's not really surprising to me, and it does seem to be supported by the research if you are hoping to maybe use it for a couple of more years. Now, for the last part of this, I want to talk about the risk of tubal pregnancy or ectopic pregnancy. And this one was really interesting to me because I haven't really heard a whole lot about this. Again, it wasn't until I got this worksheet, this set of paperwork, that I saw that it can protect from pregnancy in the tubes. Again, is the phrase that they use. And I was like, okay, why is that? Is that the location of the insertion? Is that because of the hormone used in it? Is it some other factor that's not really being considered? And so I did look at the data, and there are some research papers about this. So the main study that I looked at was a systematic review that evaluated 53 studies of implants and 28 studies of injectables. Of those, 79 reported pregnancy locations, so they could be included as part of this review, and their conclusion was that progestin-only contraceptive implants and injectables protect against ectopic pregnancy by being highly effective in preventing pregnancy overall. However, the absolute risk of ectopic pregnancy varies by type of progestin. risk of ectopic pregnancy should not be a deterrent for use or provision of these methods. So it does seem like there are some research points that do point to the fact that there is something in particular about the implant and the hormone it uses that is different from the hormones that are used in IUDs that can help prevent against ectopic pregnancy. So one thing that I thought was really interesting in this research as well is they did look at the total number of studies for each variety of birth control they were looking at, and then the total number of women involved in those studies. So for Implanon and Nexplanon, it was 2 different studies totaling over 200,000 women. And then they also looked at the percentage of pregnancies reported that were ectopic. So for Nexplanon and Implanon, 2.3% of all of the reported pregnancies were ectopic, and that is actually a really big difference compared to some of the other methods, which can get up to 25%, over 30%, 20%, 50%. It can get really, really high depending on which version you're looking at. They said that pregnancy incidence in studies of the single rod Implanon Nexplanon implant is even lower, with most studies reporting 0 pregnancies. We found only 2 studies of Implanon that reported any pregnancies, which is the 2 that was referred to earlier, one with no ectopic pregnancies and one reporting 5. The latter study was a review of surveillance data submitted to Australia's Drug Regulatory Agency, which included 218 unintended pregnancies associated with Implanon use. Only 13 of those pregnancies were believed to be true method failures, and it is not clear if the 5 ectopic pregnancies were among that group. Exposure time was also not captured in these data, so we could not calculate an ectopic pregnancy incidence rate. Now, in the very, very bottom of the paper, in the discussion section, they wrap up by talking about this. They say, the exceptionally low number of reported failures in the literature makes Implanon/Nexplanon the most effective hormonal contraceptive available. Because pregnancy is so rare with this method, ectopic pregnancy is also extremely uncommon. So that gives me a lot of confidence in choosing this form of birth control. Now, on the note of it being the most effective form of birth control potentially, I do want to pop over very quickly, I swear this is the last thing, one other piece of research that I did find. It's not even really research, it's more like, I don't know if it's an infographic or what, it's more of like a little short research summary than anything else, but they look at a table of contraceptive failure rates, and this is part of evaluating whether or not we can recommend Nexplanon for up to 5 years of use. And what it looks like is we're looking at the copper IUD in cumulative 10 years of use. The failure rate is 1.9. And for Nexplanon, the cumulative failure rate for 5 years is 0.6. Now, compare that to several of the different forms of LNG IUDs. Their cumulative failure rates for 6 years could be anywhere, or 5 years could be anywhere from 0.87 to 1.45 to 0.9. So even compared to IUDs, it is still more effective. Now, the failure rate is still very low across the board, but it's even more effective. And for me, this was something, actually to mention this earlier, something that really caught my attention. I was actually doing some research about the Nuvaring and seeing what its failure rate actually is, because when you are looking at, you know, sort of the standard sheet of like birth control that you get at Planned Parenthood or during sex ed, and they're kind of organizing, okay, here's how effective each thing is, for the most part, the number you're getting is the perfect use rate for 1 year. However, the failure rate for typical use and over time, because each year is independent of every other year, is very different. So you're not necessarily seeing the full risk if you want to use a method of birth control for longer than a year. And there was some research and some very nice graph making done by the New York Times, which did provide a really good visual summary of how effective each form of birth control is over a pretty long course of time. And seeing that and seeing how, you know, when you're looking at the Nuvaring, yes, with perfect use, I think it's like 98% effective, but year over year with typical use, i.e., how most people in real life are going to use it, it's not actually as effective as what you get on the label, where, you know, compared to Nexplanon or even some of the IUDs, like, they stay pretty consistent, but even compared to IUDs, Nexplanon somehow still wins out at being more effective at preventing pregnancy, even on longer time scales, which, you know, if your main concern is you absolutely do not want to get pregnant and you want to look at the science and say what is the most effective, even compared to, I think on this, it looked at tubal ligation, and the failure rate for tubal ligation, having your tubes tied, is higher than Nexplanon. It's 1.9%, so similar to the copper IUD. And that just blew my mind. Now, of course, there can be bias in this research, there can be bias in these studies, and it is, you know, relatively newer. The Nexplanon implant it's about 10 years old, I think, at this point. So it is relatively newer compared to, say, the copper IUD, which has been around for much, much, much longer. So we maybe don't have quite as much data, but from the data we do have, it does seem to be pretty fucking effective. All right, so my battery died because it was really hot in this room. It's having to work very hard to stay cool, I think. But to wrap things up now, let's just do a quick little summary of what we've talked about so far. So the Nexplanon implant is an arm implant that is good for 3 years, up to 5 years, even potentially longer, looking into 7 years in terms of how long you can leave it in and expect basically perfect protection. It is the most effective form of birth control that has been studied based on the numbers from those studies, and it is relatively painless to get inserted. The most painful part is getting the needle injection for the numbing, though you do not have to look at it, obviously, if that would be upsetting or would make it worse. I personally have not really experienced any side effects so far, other than being relatively more emotional and having a shorter fuse than I normally would. However, there are many, many other side effects to be aware of. When it comes to Nexplanon, the most common would be changes in your menstrual cycle. However, there are other things that many other people report at higher levels, such as headache at about 25%, vaginitis at about 14.5%, weight increase at 13%, acne, breast pain, abdominal pain, and so on. So there are side effects to be aware of. It is a hormonal form of birth control, and with that, you can experience many side effects, though they do typically go away about in the first 3 months or so. And if it doesn't work for you, you can get it removed relatively easily at any time. Typically, if you are in the US, this is covered by insurance. It shouldn't cost you more than $300-ish, though it can cost up to $1,300 on the sticker price. However, again, if you are in the US, if you have insurance, in most cases, it is going to be covered. It is most likely going to be free or a reduced cost. And if you want to check with your insurer to see if it is covered, I will put the procedure codes in right now, so that way it can be a little bit easier to talk to your insurance company. But overall, a lot of people do have a lot of satisfaction with this. I didn't really think that this was going to be an option that I ever considered until I learned about the newer version, which is why I'm making this video, why I'm going to be doing a little bit of a series on this, because at the time I was being raised, like, we had all these horrible stories about Norplant, and it seemed really alien and weird to have like all this stuff in your arm, and now there's more out there. And I did actually talk to the doctor that did the procedure, and she told me that among young people, it's actually about as equally as popular as the IUD. I don't really know what young people means. That means like teenagers, that means Zoomers, if it means college kids, if it means anyone under 30. I'm not sure exactly what young means, but it does seem to be gaining more popularity, and it does seem to have relatively high satisfaction levels, which is always good to hear, because it means that you are likely going to be satisfied with the implant. And who wants to take a risk on getting something inserted into your body that might not work for you? So I feel very confident about this going forward. For me, overall, it's been a positive experience. I am curious to see how symptoms change or develop in the coming months. If you guys do have any questions that I didn't cover in this video, please let me know what they are down below. I will link to, or at least cite, the studies that I did talk about also down in the description box, so that way you guys can check them out for yourselves. And if I can, I would like to maybe do this video as a Planned Parenthood fundraiser. I did get dinged by YouTube for community guideline strikes for linking to my own social media pages. So I think that maybe caused them to take away the donation feature, but if I can get that set up, I will do that. And it would be so amazing if you guys could donate to Planned Parenthood during this time, because, you know, they are doing a lot of very, very important work and will continue to do so. And again, every experience I've had at any of their clinics has been amazingly positive, amazingly just inclusive and understanding. And, you know, I would always recommend them, honestly. Just nothing but good experiences. So that's going to be everything for today, guys. Again, I'm going to be doing a follow-up. If I forgot anything, any follow-up questions, anything else, you can go ahead and put in the comment section down below. If you want to make sure to not miss out on a follow-up video to this or any of my other videos, I do talk about BDSM, kink, sex, relationships, asexuality, a bunch of other stuff as well. Go ahead and subscribe, so go ahead and click that little subscribe thing, little button down below if you have not already. And if you really want to support what I do, the best you can do that is with Patreon. A link to that will be down below. Thank you all so much for choosing to support me over there. It means the absolute world to me. And until I see you all next time, I hope you have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.